This is a story about an Egyptian man who met a non-human woman in disguise in Egypt. Now let's begin. Carlos says, "Hello, my name is Carlos and I'm 32 years old. I'm Egyptian, but I live outside of Egypt." Let's get straight to the point. What I'm about to tell you is a story I hesitated to share 1,000 times before deciding to tell anyone. I thought about it over and over before deciding to share it with you. Know that I always backed out at the last minute. But today, without hesitation, I've decided to tell you without swearing or pledging, because God is my witness that I speak the truth without exaggeration or omission. I am married to a European woman, and we live outside of Egypt. Therefore, I visit my country every year or every 6 months, depending on work and time constraints. When I visit Egypt, we usually stay in a hotel. However, when I visited my family in 2008, I decided to stay in a residential complex. For those who don't know, a residential complex is a group of residential units built next to each other in a specific independent location, surrounded by walls, gates, and security to provide safety for the residents. Anyway, I booked a small apartment in this residential complex to be close to my parents who live in Hurghada. When I arrived with my wife, we received the keys to the apartment and paid the rent. We visited my parents and had a great time with them, and everything was going well until the next day around 10 a.m. As I was leaving the residential complex, a taxi stopped and a woman got out of it, catching my attention. She was large in stature, with a swollen belly. Her body was larger than a normal woman's body. I don't mean to mock her appearance, but you'll understand later why I'm focusing on this. Her eyes also caught my attention. They were wide and protruding oddly outward, blinking infrequently. Her hair was short, red, and light, cut randomly. Her skin color changed from white to red, so I thought to myself, this is natural since she's a foreign woman and can't bear the hot sun rays in Egypt. I approached this strange woman, and she spoke to me in American English, which shocked me because her voice was akin to cartoon aliens, with a slightly higher pitch at the end and louder than normal. She said to me in English, "Can you help me?" I replied, "Sure. What do you need?" She told me that she had booked an apartment and paid the owner in advance. But since her arrival, he hadn't responded to her calls, and she didn't know his address or how to reach him. She felt she had been scammed. So I asked her how I could help her. She said, "If you could find me an apartment to rent here, I'd appreciate it." I said, "Of course." I called the man from whom I rented the apartment and introduced him to her. He showed us an apartment in the same building where my wife and I were staying, and she paid for 5 to 10 days of rent, signed the contract, and received the keys. Up until this point, everything was fine, but I swear to God, what I'm about to tell you now is what actually happened. Pay close attention. The woman's apartment was on the 2nd floor, while mine and my wife's were on the 5th, consisting of 8 apartments. I helped her carry her bags and escorted her to her door, then left the residential complex with my wife. We didn't return to our apartment until around 8 p.m. We entered the apartment and relaxed for a bit. After about 10 minutes, I heard someone knocking on the door. I looked through the peephole to see who was there, and I was shocked. My tongue tied up as I found out that the person knocking was the same woman. When my wife saw my astonishment, she asked me what was happening. I told her that the strange woman was standing at the door, and I didn't know how she found out which apartment we were living in. As I mentioned earlier, there were 8 apartments on that floor. So how could the woman know which apartment we lived in among all those apartments? One might argue that she asked the owner of the residential complex, and he directed her. But I confirmed later with the owner of the complex, and he said he hadn't seen her, hadn't met her, and she hadn't spoken to him. But let's go back to the moment she knocked on the door. Carlos continues the story, saying, I opened the door and she spoke to me. She asked about her well-being and thanked me and my wife for helping her. Then, after that, she left quietly. Carlos further narrates, there was a swimming pool in the middle of the residential complex where we lived, and I spent most of my time swimming. I used to see this woman constantly, at least once or twice a day. Of course, since the moment this strange woman knocked on our door, my wife and I started feeling anxious about her. But during the following 3 days, we didn't see her at all. I grew concerned for her and told my wife. I'm afraid something bad might have happened to her, especially since her appearance was somewhat strange, and it seemed like her body was suffering from some kind of trauma. That's why I decided that my wife and I should go and check on her. We took the elevator, and her apartment was on the last floor, the second floor. As we approached the apartment, we noticed something on the floor in front of the door, and when we reached it, we found a wooden basket, Carlos recalls. I swear by Almighty God, what my wife and I saw inside that basket was terrifying. It contained an old small doll, animal teeth, a jawbone of a cat or a dog, a bunch of needles, blonde hair of unknown origin, and other things I couldn't focus on because we were so scared. So I calmly told my wife, let's get out of here as fast as we can. At that moment, as we turned to head towards the stairs, the woman opened the door and said to us, hello? I've been waiting for you. Carlos recounts. I swear by Almighty God, my body shivered. And in that moment, my wife and I felt like we were going to faint from fear. I was afraid that this woman would harm us in some way. So I said to her, we came to check on you, and I hope you're okay. Now we must go outside. But she replied, saying, come inside. I prepared a drink for you that you'll like. I replied, no, thank you. We must leave because someone is waiting for us. I tried in every possible way to leave the place immediately, Carlos continues. But before that, I cast a fleeting glance at her apartment from the outside, and to my surprise, it was dark. There were no open windows. All the curtains were drawn, and darkness enveloped the place. After that, we rushed outside, exchanging looks of shock because we were in disbelief about what we had seen. The next day, my wife and I decided to visit my family together, Carlos Narvaez. We took the elevator from the 5th floor to the ground floor, and to my surprise, I found the strange woman standing at the entrance of the building, also about to leave. The strange thing was that it was impossible for that woman to descend from the 2nd floor to the ground floor via the staircase because of her large physique. When I requested the elevator from the 5th floor, it took me directly to the ground floor. So how did the woman get there? Carlos questions. And let me tell you, dear viewers, that the most thrilling part of this story is yet to come, Carlos declares. As my wife and I walked down the street, I noticed that this woman was walking beside us. My wife said to me, I'm afraid of her. I'll pretend to be on the phone and walk away from her. And you should also, act accordingly. So I stopped and asked her, "How are you, madam? Where are you going?" She replied, "I'm fine, and I'm going to the beach." Curiosity compelled me to ask her 2 additional questions, and I wish I hadn't, Carlos reflects. I asked her why she came to Egypt. She replied, "I came for the pyramids and the Sphinx." Then I asked her, "What's your nationality?" The woman laughed a laugh filled with malice and said, "I'm American." And finally, I asked her the question I wished I hadn't asked. "How old are you?" Her answer was extremely shocking. She literally told me, "I come from a very distant place, but if I were to be the same age as the Earth's inhabitants, I would be 500 years old. I swear by Almighty God, this is what that woman told me," Carlos affirms. After that, she laughed a laugh that I can't describe. It was a mixture of fear, evil, and mockery. But to be honest, I was very scared, and I felt like my heart was going to stop beating from the shock and amazement. I didn't know at that moment whether she was speaking seriously, if she was a crazy woman, or if I was the one who didn't understand her intention. After that conversation, each of us went our separate ways, Carlos continues. And after 2 days, the owner of the residential complex called me and asked me if the woman had informed me that she would be leaving the apartment. I replied in the negative. He informed me that he found the keys to the apartment left in front of the door, and when he entered, he found it clean and tidy, as if no one had lived there in the past few days. I told this man that I didn't want to know anything about that woman. He told me that she paid rent for 5 or 10 days, but she only stayed for 9 days. I told him, "I don't care. Take the money and rent out the apartment." While returning to my apartment, I glanced at the place where that woman lived, Carlos recalls. I found it clean, as if no one had ever lived there, and there were no belongings to indicate that she had ever lived there. That woman, or whatever she was, disappeared completely, as if she had never existed in the first place.